Hi everyone. Today's lesson is about graphing periodic functions, specifically just focusing on amplitude and period change. And so when you're done with that, you'll have a homework worksheet. All right, so we're going to start by graphing the um, trig function sine. And in order to do this, what you do is you're going to look at your unit circle and you are going to plot the points that are related to sine. So sine is always the y values off of your unit circle. So you are going to plot the y values with each of the angles. So you go to your unit circle, look at the angle 0, and see that sine is equal to 0 at that spot. And for some reason, my pen isn't working. Let's try. Here we go. All right, so 0. Then at pi over 2, the sine value is 1. Then at pi, the sine value is back to 0. At 3 pi over 2, the sine value is negative 1. And at 2 pi, the sine value is back to 0. So when you go to graph, you're going to take the length of the period, which I kind of gave this to here, is from 0 to 2 pi. We're just going to go out and mark 2 pi on the grid. And then you're going to mark off some values in the middle, because you're going to need a total of 5 points, 0 being one of them. So you have 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. So you have 5 markings, so we needed 4 more. And the other markings will all be like cutting the regions in half. So I cut 2 pi in half and got pi. I cut pi in half and got pi over 2, and then this one is 3 pi over 2. Okay, so then once you've got that, then you're going to go ahead and find a maximum and a minimum. So this is going to be your amplitude markings. So the highest value is 1 and the lowest value is negative 1. And we're just going to go ahead and plot some points. And then just connect them. And I am not able to use my stylus for some reason on my computer today, so I'm trying to use the mouse. So we'll see how this goes. All right, so there is my excuse me, my sine curve, and the amplitude is the highest value from the middle, and the middle happens to be 0. For all the ones we're doing today, the midline will always be y equals 0. Tomorrow we'll focus on changing that midline. And you can see the amplitude then is from the middle up 1 or down 1, so the amplitude is 1. And the period then is how long it takes to do one cycle, and so you get 2 pi as your period. And if we were to go past 2 pi here, then the graph would start to repeat. Or if, like I went to the left here, the graph would start to repeat as well. So you'd see it starting to have the same values over and over again. Okay, let's talk about cosine now. So your cosine curve, we're going to use the same values that we did for the sine curve. So again, looking at your unit circle to help you out, cosine of 0 is 1. Cosine of pi over 2 is 0, because remember, cosine is the x values off the unit circle. Cosine of pi is negative 1. Cosine of 3 pi over 2 is 0 again. And cosine of 2 pi is back to 1. So you can see that my maximum value is 1 and my minimum value is negative 1. And just like before, I'm going to mark out the distance that I'm going of 2 pi. And then find 4 more markings evenly marked in the middle, which for cosine will just be like sine. We'll use pi over 2, pi, and 3 pi over 2. Oops. Okay, so then I'm going to notice that cosine starts up at the highest value of 1, then goes to the middle, then goes to the lowest value, back to the middle, back to the top. And so I'm going to connect these two, these 4, and here's my cosine curve. But one thing I want to point out is if I took this cosine curve and I extended it backwards or extended it forwards, again, it's going to start to repeat. And even more so, it actually it is a shift of your sine curve. So remember, sine started here on the last graph, and it's like we shifted the sine graph to the right. That is why we call it cosine. So it's the complement of the sine graph. So we took the sine graph and shifted it to create cosine. Everything is the same for the cosine graph as the sine because they are just shifts of each other. So the midline is still 0. The period is still 2 pi. And then the amplitude is 1. Okay, so then here, we're going to fill in some specific information about the graph when we're changing things. So now we're going to focus on changing some things. So the amplitude is the number in front of the function. So it's A. And the amplitude changes basically the height of the graph. So the amplitude helps determine the max and the minimum. It also is the highest or lowest point. Helps determine that value. There we go. Okay, and then we'll come back to the period one because that's a little bit more difficult to understand. So we'll do the midline next. So the midline is determined by D. So D gives you the midline. And D, the midline, determines the shift, up or down. Okay, so if it's a 2, it's going to move it up or down 2. But we will talk about the midline tomorrow. And then the period of the graph is actually not B. It feels like it should just be B, but it is not. It is actually, so if you think about the sine curve, the period was 2 pi, but the B value was equal to 1. So the way that you actually figure out the period is you take 2 pi, which is the normal period, and divide by B to get you the new period. And the period determines how long or short the graph will be. So it determines the length of a cycle, but it determines long or short, shrinks it or stretches the graph. Okay. So let's do some practice problems here. And again, remember, if you need to, just pause or go back to get any information that I went too fast for. Okay, so for this problem, remember I told you for all of them, we are not going to be worrying about the midline changing. So this midline will be y equals 0. The period isn't changing either, because there's no b value. So the period is 2 pi. The only thing that's changing is the amplitude, and that's 2. So I'm going to mark on my graph up 2, down 2. I'm going to mark 5 markings here, well, 4 additional markings with the length going out to 2 pi here. And since it's sine always starts in the middle, and then it goes up, goes back to the middle, goes down to the lowest value, and then back to the middle. So the shape of the graph is the same, it just has a different highest and different lowest point. So there is my y equals 2 sine x graph. Okay, so let's do this one here. Don't know why there's this extra grid here, so we're just going to ignore that. So in this problem, again, the midline isn't changing, so that's y equals 0. And the period isn't changing on this one either. There's no b value, so this is just 2 pi. And the amplitude is 1/3, but we're going to say we're going to keep the negative attached to it. The negative tells you to flip the graph upside down. So when we graph my cosine, instead of starting at the top, we'll start at the lowest value. Otherwise, I'm not really worried about making it look like it's 1/3. Just make a marking that's 1/3 and negative 1/3. And then again, we want our 4 additional markings here. Since the period didn't change, all of these values from before are the same. This is really hard to do with the mouse. Okay, and now again, we're doing cosine, but flipped. The negative is flipping it. So it's going to start down at the lowest value, go to the middle, then go to the top, back to the middle, back to the lowest value, and connect them all. There we go. Kind of like an upside down U there. All right, next one. Now I see where the grid went. This is missing a grid. So now we're actually changing the period of the graph this time. So the amplitude is not changing here, just the period of the graph. So the amplitude is 1. No number out front means 1. The midline is still 0. And then to get the change in the period, remember, I'm going to do this down here. You're going to take 2 pi, the normal period of the graph, and divide by the b value. And the b value is 2. And those 2's are going to cancel. So that means that the period is just pi. Okay, so I have a top value of 1, a bottom value of -1. The period is pi now, but it doesn't really matter how you mark it in terms of like, as it looks smaller, you just have to make sure that you mark it off by pi. And then you need to figure out what all these middle values are. So a lot of times I just start by dividing in half. These are actually on the unit circle, so you could go find them. So half of pi is pi over 2. Half of pi over 2 is pi over 4. And then in the middle of pi over 2 and pi is 3 pi over 4. And again, those are on your circle. So if you want to go look at the circle to do that, you can. And this is sine. And so sine starts at the middle, goes to the top, back to the middle, down to the bottom, back to the middle. Connect them all. Okay. Is this the last one or is there one more? One more after this. Okay. So this one is a cosine that has both a change in the period as well as a change in the amplitude. Midline, still 0. Amplitude, 4. So I'm not even going to worry about having 4 markings. I'm just going to mark at it's a spot that's, I'm going to call it 4 and I'm going to call it -4. And then the period will be 2 pi divided by a half. And remember, when you're dividing by a fraction, that is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal of that fraction. So I'm really multiplying 2 pi by 2, which gives me a period of 4 pi. So now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to mark off 4 pi. And then figure out what my markings in the middle will be from there. So this is just going to go up by pi. So 1 pi, whoops, 2 pi, 3 pi, and 4 pi. Notice that the graphs really don't look that much different, just the numbers are different. So when you take a test on this, we're really going to be looking to see that you have put the correct numbers on the graph. And that's a cosine curve, it's positive, so it starts up at the top. All right, last one. So now this one has a change in the period and a change in the amplitude. The amplitude is a half. Actually, before I do this, I'm not even going to do any numbers first. I'm just going to mark. So I know I'm going to have some sort of amplitude, and I know I'm going to have this period that's going to give me 4 additional markings. And I see that my amplitude has a negative out front, so my sine graph is going to start in the middle, go down, go to the middle, go to the top, go back to the middle. So the graph is going to go like this regardless of the numbers. And now I can just figure out the numbers based upon the stuff that's here. So my amplitude is a -1/2. So that means my top value will be a half and the bottom value will be a -1/2. And my midline, of course, is 0. And my period will be 2 pi divided by pi, because that's what's in there for b. So the period is 2. So that means out here is 2. Well, that means this is 1. That means this is a half. And that means this is 3 halves. So now I don't have any pi's because I divided out the pi, but otherwise the fractions are the same. All right, so we'll do more of this tomorrow in class. Hopefully this makes sense. And of course, you can watch the video again or ask questions in class when you come in.